So, music theory, I think, is a subject that confuses a lot of people when it really shouldn't. And I think that happens for a few key misunderstandings that people have of what music theory is even for, like what its purpose actually is and what it's meant to do for you as a musician or as a creator or as an engineer or whatever role you play in sound as art. Theory is something that's very, very fun to learn about, in my opinion. I think it can open up a lot of perspectives to music and everything that accompanies it that you might not have thought of before having not studied it. But a lot of people never get to have that enjoyment because they get so confused by the initial, mental load of what you have to do to get into a place where you can just kind of work with it and feel it. But really, it's much simpler than those mindsets make it out to be. And I think that there are three key reasons why that happens to a lot of people who are trying to study music theory that might not be aware of them. Today, I just want to talk about those misunderstandings or perspectives that might be limiting your enjoyment and understanding of what theory is actually for and what you can do with it. I'm going to play some guitar to show some examples and work through some concepts and just to explore the ideas that we'll be discussing. So the first misconception or reason for confusion that I want to talk about is one that I see probably the most often of all three of these. A lot of musicians early in this process of learning think that music theory is supposed to be predictive or generative, but it really is just descriptive. Theory is a tool to describe sounds to another person, to even be able to communicate about music meaningfully with another musician or someone else. You need to have a language of understanding that you both agree on. That's what music theory is. It's a language for describing music. It doesn't create music. It just tells you what the music is in a language that people agree on. Now, of course, theory can inspire you and give you some new ideas or perspectives to work with, but that doesn't really mean that it itself is generative or predictive. You are, as a musician, are generative or predictive. The theory is just a tool for you to use to orient yourself in a cognitive space of sound and music. You need something to latch onto in that space to connect it beyond just your hearing sense. This is very confusing to a lot of musicians because they'll spend a lot of time really looking for the wrong solution to a problem that they might not even have. A lot of people go to theory or start studying it really intensely with, I guess, the wrong motivation. They're looking to it as like, oh, I don't feel creative. I don't feel like I can write anything. Let me just go study all of this dense theory and not really make any music and just learn all these concepts and drill them and memorize them, and that's gonna be what makes me creative. But it doesn't really work for that purpose. I think what works for that purpose are things that are more human or aesthetic, like learning music you appreciate, or having a new life experience, or drawing from powerful experiences in your past to create a new tone on your instrument, or maybe sing a different way or write a new melody. Those kinds of things are generative or predictive of what you might do with your music. Theory is a tool to describe. It doesn't really go beyond that unless you kind of combine other things with it. So that is the first common misconception that I see in people trying to learn theory and getting confused, is that they just think it's doing something that it's not really meant for. And they get frustrated when they don't see that result from their studies. Let's go a little further into the idea that music theory is descriptive and not generative or predictive. Let's examine like a simple chord progression you might have encountered before. Let's do A minor 7, and then we'll do a half step motion to a B flat major 7. Or just an A minor chord to a B flat major chord. Like the upper voices can be whatever you're feeling. That's what I'm doing right now. So let's just play some ideas based on those two chords. Okay, so that has kind of a certain feel that we pick up over the melody and like the root changes and stuff. But what if I want to go in the other direction? Like, what if I just want to take this A minor chord and I want to go to this chord, just to see what happens, to move that major 7 in the other direction. Well, the theoretical description of it changes a good bit, but to just get to the idea, to generate the idea, then we can just try it. We don't need to necessarily understand all of the technical workings of exactly what's going on. If it sounds cool, then it sounds cool. So let's just try it. So that sounds a good bit different, but we didn't have to think about all the theoretical implications of what was going on to just try it and see if it sounds cool. To show that, let's go into the theoretical description a little bit to just see kind of what theory is really helping us do here. So if I make that change and I do this, and I go to that half step down chord instead of the B flat major 7, the description of what's going on changes a lot. So this first progression is a diatonic progression, meaning that both of the chords can be thought of as in the same key signature, and that would be the key signature of F major. So both of those chords are natural to F major, so that kind of simplifies our description of it a little bit. We can say, okay, well, this is the third chord of that key, and this is the fourth chord of that key. So to describe the sound, we use the theoretical notation and the theoretical language. But to just decide if we like the sound or decide to try it and create ideas on it, it doesn't really matter what we think about it theoretically, we just have to try it. So the theoretical description changes when we do something like this. Then we have to think about, okay, well, what key can I think of this chord being in? Because it's not in that same key of F. Well, there's a few options, and that's where theory comes in to help us describe it, or to help us maybe solidify our thinking. So this chord, A flat major 7, can be thought of as being in F minor. That could be the key signature. It could be in a couple of other keys. It could be the second chord of F sharp. There's a lot of options, but specifically why I like that chord here is because it sets up a nice resolution with the fifth of our A minor with this, because that A flat major 7 I think really implies this E flat, and then we can use that nice half step resolution in the melody line as well as the bass. But to do that and to just hear it and think it sounds good, we didn't have to know the theoretical description. So that's the point. Don't get confused. Don't think that the theory is just going to give you the idea. You're just going to have to try things and figure things out on your own, and then theory will help you ground your experience and communicate it to other people. Continuing the point about theory as a language, a lot of people understand music theory as a set of absolute rules about what sounds good and what doesn't sound good. That misunderstanding is the second reason that I want to discuss. It's easy to view music theory as a set of rules like that dictate what you can and can't do in certain situations. But if that were the case, then we wouldn't see the varying musical traditions and theoretical systems that we do today on Earth. By that I mean that if music theory were really about absolute rules, it would be more like science in the fact that the weight of carbon is the same in the United States as it is in Brazil, as it is in Japan, but the musical theoretical systems of language and analysis and description in the United States and Brazil and Japan are all very different, and they all have their own kind of regional systems and ideas that don't really apply to other musical traditions. Science isn't like that. It's about absolute rules. So music theory, because it varies in this way across cultures and across traditions, it can't be about absolute rules. So if theory is not giving us absolute hard and fast rules, it's just describing things that are common to us, because a thing that is very common is easy to perceive as a rule unless you think about other instances of the same thing, like we did with the cross-cultural sort of idea. The things that we think of as rules in music theory are really just common tendencies and patterns in human taste across certain regions that have been perpetuated long enough to become officialized and ingrained in theoretical books and like manuscripts. But that doesn't mean that they're really limiting the possibilities of what music can be or of what you think should sound good. It's just a way to describe things that have become very common and often do sound good for whatever reason. Those are still things that we actively research today and don't know. But the fact that theory is different from different people and locations and traditions and cultures means that it can't be about rules. It can only be about common systems of practice that are then described in a theoretical formalism. So the key here is don't get confused when learning music theory that it's telling you that this is what sounds good and nothing that you are not seeing here sounds good or can be played or used. That's not a good way to think about it. You are allowed to come up with your own rules of what sounds good and what you like and what you don't like and the things you appreciate about music, and theory isn't going to help you do any of that. It's just going to help you describe those things to another musician and analyze it and orient yourself in a cognitive space of musical concepts. So the second reason we talked about was believing that music theory is telling you absolute rules about what you can and should do in any situation. So let's go through a few examples and show that that's not really how theory applies or is useful. So okay, to do that, let's try and write like a quick little chord progression, and then we'll use G as our like home chord, like a G major 7, or let's do this voicing to spice it up. So this is our G major 7 voicing. And we can go to whatever chord we want. So if we're thinking about traditional theory, then we could stay inside the key of G, right? So we have those 7 notes to make some chords from. So we can do our G, and let's say we do A. Okay, well, does that mean that the only sounds that can sound good are the ones that are suggested by traditional theory? No, not at all. Let's try something that's not really suggested by traditional theory and just see what happens. We'll take our major 7 chord, and then we'll swap it for that same major 7 like drop voicing, but only up a half step. Let's just see what happens. Like that voicing I was playing on the B here, like the inversion of the same chord. And the reason I want to try this is because I just want to see what happens when you kind of move the line like this and use this E flat to kind of spice up how you go back to this strong note of G, which is the 5th. So let's try it. Kind of a funky feel. It doesn't really sound square, or it doesn't really sound traditional, or it's just hard to place, but I think it has an interesting quality to it. And it wasn't really suggested by any music theory term or anything like that. I'm sure we could come up with one, but it was just something that we thought might sound cool on the top line from. We just take our top line. Okay, well, what if I want to hear this? But we like the way this sounds. We need to find some way to get this note in there, so we'll just pick a chord that has that note and adjust if we don't like it. And it doesn't really have to be guided by any sort of theoretical understanding. You might be aided with the theoretical understanding to know how you're moving and like kind of what you're doing with it, but it doesn't have to be there for you to know that it is an accepted rule or an accepted move, like in a game of chess or something. There's only certain moves you can make that are allowed by the rules, but music is not like that. You can do whatever you want, and if it sounds good to you, it sounds good to you. That's the whole point. The final reason that I'd like to discuss may seem obvious at first, but it can be very insidious, and it's something that I dealt with personally for a while. Some musicians fully understand the first 2 points that I've discussed in this video. They know that music theory is not predictive or generative, and they know that it's not about rules. It's not telling them what they can and can't do. So because of that, they feel like it's not important, and they just ignore it entirely, never really thinking critically about whether or not it could benefit them. I was this person for a few years in my early guitar playing time. At the time, I was in high school playing in a metal band I had started with some friends, and I was writing more songs than I ever had before, at a faster pace than I ever had before. And I felt really good writing music. It was something that was fun, and I could hear what I wanted in my head, and I could kind of make it happen on my guitar, and I enjoyed the whole process of doing all of that. But I kind of knew that there was something that I was missing, because it was very hard for me to talk about those ideas to other people, or to say that, okay, this guitar part sounds this way because of these things. It was really just like, well, I heard it that way and I played it and it looks like this and I kind of think that's the key signature, and okay, yeah, that's it. I didn't really understand that studying more advanced music theory beyond just the like limited basics that I knew would help me navigate my creativity and would help me be able to connect those ideas with other musicians more easily and just enrich my whole experience of creating with my band. At that time, I didn't get that because I understood the first 2 points. I was like, well, I mean, if it's not going to tell me rules I need to follow, or if it's not going to help me generate new ideas just like that, then it's not worth doing. I'll just focus more time on writing and practicing, and like that. Those are good things, but I was really misunderstanding what theory was for and why it might help me. Now, this isn't the case for every musician. A lot of musicians don't really need to have that experience. It just depends on what you do musically and what your goals are. But for me, I was playing in a metal band. I still play metal music. I was trying to get better at guitar. I was trying to open up new sounds on guitar. And for me, studying some theory later after that whole time period of being in that band, getting into it more seriously, really helped me enjoy guitar and enjoy music on a whole nother level that I did not know about previously. This type of confusion is really the opposite mechanism of the first two that I discussed. In the first two cases, we have a misunderstanding that music theory is seemingly supposed to do more than it ever was supposed to do, that it's supposed to be creative for us. And in the last reason, it's a misunderstanding of thinking that music theory does not have value because it isn't about rules or it isn't predictive or generative. All three of them, I think, are critical for musicians to maybe recognize in their own history and learn from, because I think a lot of people at any point in their playing career or singing career or just music in general have experienced one of these things and been confused about studying and practicing and what learning capital T theory can really do for you and what it's supposed to be. I hope that talking about these three reasons for confusion might have helped you in some way to overcome a perspective you might have on theory, or maybe in your own playing, or whatever musical goal you might have. I think theory is something very enriching that everyone should at least spend some time learning, and then you can take it further depending on your goals and what you want to do. It's not really necessary for everyone. Some people just don't really interact with music in that way. Instead, they interact with music on a tonal or rhythmic or timbral level, and those are totally different things than music theory, capital T theory, like we were talking about, might describe to you. So if you've got any questions about something I talked about in this video, maybe strategies for practice routines or things you can do to incorporate perspectives that will help you overcome these reasons for confusion, let me know in a comment. I'd love to talk about it, and we can get into it and figure out more about this together. All right, friends, that's going to do it for me today. Hope you all have fun with your playing and your studying and your writing and everything you're doing, and I will see you in the next video.